Hey there, Bill. How are you doing today?
Robin, it is a cool and crisp day north of the 40th parallel, but we're doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Over here in the jolly UK, we're steaming towards winter. The first few flakes of snow has fallen, and everybody starts to panic. But
Of
onwards
course.
to a bright and crisp December. Now, as we
Absolutely.
move forward, we can't ignore what has already happened in the past. So, let's cover our first topic, and let's talk about Killnet. Ooh, scary. Tell us about the Killnet group. Tell us about the gang.
You bet. Super scary name. Very interesting group that we are dealing with here. So, Killnet self identifies as a group of Russian hackers. We first saw them roughly around the January 2022 timeframe. Robin, when they originally surfaced, they fancied themselves to be hackers for hire. They would sell their services, particularly around DDoS or distributed denial of service. Now, a very interesting thing happened with them as things began to unfold with the conflict in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia. They really transformed themselves into a more patriotic styled group, supporting Russia and the endeavors that Russia was trying to engage upon. And this loosely organized collective, often they collaborate over Telegram, really began to try to push an agenda that was in line with some of the political aims.
Ah, the joy of hacktivists. People who are trying to push an agenda with their attacks instead of just doing it for the love of the attack itself. I mean, I personally, I was looking on some unscrupulous websites, know your enemy, and I saw some hackers for hire going for, say, $50 for a small scale DDoS attack. And considering how wide somebody can have a botnet spread, that is quite scary. I know we've talked in the past as phishing as a service, we talked about caffeine and other tools, but what can we do to prevent Killnet from being a problem?
So, Killnet loves to do distributed denial of service attacks, and some of the analysts within the industry have looked at these attacks as being rather primitive. Now, primitive or not, distributed denial of service can indeed be disruptive. In this particular case, we've been able to identify the pattern that's used. Often, the attacks indeed are very basic in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. They will attempt to brute force very standard protocols such as FTP or Secure Shell, even HTTP and Secure HTTP, utilizing these distributed denial of service attacks. Now, as far as protecting against that, there's a lot of conversation around that, Robin, because when you're trying to protect against distributed denial of service attacks, you really need to look at it from two key perspectives. One is protecting DDoS attacks against applications, and one is protecting against DDoS attacks on infrastructure. In the case of applications, we can certainly utilize available technologies such as content delivery networks. When we do talk about infrastructure attacks, though, there are some things that we're able to do to mitigate those attacks, such as doing rate control or essentially being able to hide that infrastructure behind either additional bandwidth or, in the case of Cato networks, because of the nature of our backbone, the very architecture of it is a protecting factor against these distributed denial of service attacks.
Primitive isn't a bad thing. You say DDoS are primitive attacks, primitive tools. I'm in the UK. We're not allowed guns here. I'm allowed rocks. If I was to chase you with a rock, that primitive attack, you would still be kind of a little worried, a little
I would
scared.
be equally worried, yes.
Yes. And while you're running away from the rocks, who else knows what's happening? Sometimes DDoS attacks are used as a distraction mechanism, or it can impact your overall business continuity flow. So here at Cato, we, as you've mentioned, we have multiple anti-DDoS procedures against our infrastructure. We have ways of mitigating surface attacks and attack vectors and employing that zero trust approach. But if you're not a Cato customer, if you don't have that layer of protection against the service infrastructure, how can I prevent these rogue hacktivists, these rogue action groups who want to do people harm from doing harm?
That's a very fascinating subject to contemplate because without this kind of architecture, this resilient architecture that gets provided, a lot of times that really boils down to the old traditional legacy hardware. And one of the most difficult aspects of that is making sure that that hardware can scale to handle those attacks. We talked about a recent attack that came via Mirai not too long ago, and cloud delivery network provider Cloudflare indicated that it was one of the largest that they've seen in history. As we consider these things and protecting private cloud infrastructure in particular, we really need to bear in mind that the legacy approaches are necessarily going to be costly. They can be a little bit difficult to implement, and it's still no guarantee against the sheer scale that these distributed denial of service attacks can take on.
Now, I've talked to some people, and some of my friends who are app architects and web designers, and they actually did themselves a lot of harm when trying to protect against DDoS attacks. They blocked all bots from accessing websites. They're an e-commerce company, not going to say the name here. But once they started blocking all bots, they actually found that things like Google AdWords, McAfee SafeScan, and other tools weren't actually working because they just flat out blocked everything. So how can you still give access to the right bots while protecting against the wrong bots?
It really comes down to not painting with a broad brush, Robin. We need to be very strategic in the way that we attempt to protect against these distributed denial of service attacks, because we do know the benefit of automation, particularly when you are utilizing a commerce website and want to have some of that visibility that comes about from some of these automated systems that really can promote what you're trying to do. So resiliency, the ability to be fairly granular in your controls and yet still be able to detect that traffic and identify when rates are getting too high, it's abnormal, and we need to necessarily sinkhole it or block it.
I like the term block it. You know, Cato, we're application aware, we have fantastic intrusion prevention systems. So theoretically, if you were seeing a nation state attack, quite quickly within our IPS, you can just create a geoblock. You can block an entire country from ingress or egress, which might not fully resolve the problem, as we all know botnets decide to sprawl globally. But if you can mitigate even 10% of the attack surface, you have caused yourself, well, you've prevented yourself from having pain, which is a nice extra way. And
that's the granularity, that's the customized controls, Robin, and being able to do that from one spot and to set that policy from that single location and be able to make that apply to whatever your business is trying to accomplish, you can't underestimate the value of that.
Indeed. Killnet and other heroes for hire or hacktivists for hire, you know, it's very, the understanding, the perception, some people see themselves heroes, some as hacktivists. That's a philosophical discussion I think an entire episode could be dedicated to.
Sure.
But if we can mitigate that vulnerability, if you can make life more controlled and secure and have visibility and consistency and transparency of service to your end users if you're under attack, well, Cato can kind of provide all of that. But anyway, that's enough talking about the negatives of DDoS. Let's move over to some other cyber fun. Let's talk about the good old things of Jolly London and the National Security Cyber Center. I forgot. NSCS.
That's a mouthful, right?
I'm tripping over my words today.
Sure. Yeah. So the NCSC, and this is one that can be confused, Robin, because this is not the first time we've seen this acronym. We love acronyms in cybersecurity, of course, but we are referring specifically to the NCSC that's based in the UK. That's the National Cybersecurity Center. It's fascinating the role that the NCSC has taken in that we've received word that they are beginning to scan any UK hosted internet exposed devices to collect information about the vulnerabilities that exist. So we're really taking a broad approach in the United Kingdom to identify where those vulnerabilities may exist in those devices that happen to face outward. And what they're doing is they're tracking those vulnerabilities, making certain to inform those who own those assets, and even tracking remediation as they share that data.
That's exciting, but also a little scary, a little Orwellian to a point. I remember one of the US organizations got well, some negative press a few years back when it comes to some fiber splitters and trying to do very, very similar. So do you think we should be concerned about this?
You know, there is this fine line between freedom of information and speech, and also trying to ensure that we have the security. And you're right, it does raise some privacy concerns. Maybe the fact that the NCSC is identifying the vulnerabilities and then giving away Nmap scripts will soothe some of the concerns. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. It certainly can be viewed as helpful, but we've gotten assurance from the NCSC that not only are their efforts not nefarious, but they do provide an option for organizations to opt out of those scans. So certainly trying to mitigate any of the concerns of an Orwellian nature, and trying to really increase the security posture on a broad scale for those who may happen to maintain that presence that faces the internet.
Mm-hmm. The NS, I find it really hard to say this acronym. The Center provide
Yes.
really good accreditation. I know Cyber Essentials Plus is one of the requirements to be on many frameworks here in the UK. And I know
That's right.
Cato aligns very closely with this, and we have white papers showing how you can be Cyber Essentials aligned. If anybody's listening and want it, reach out to us, we can provide. But what can Cato do regarding this scanning? What can we do to identify issues and problems, and how can we help the greater good, as it would be?
Let's take a step back on that question, Robin, because the scope of that question is actually really broad. And if you don't have an understanding of what the Cyber Essential scheme is, that may be a little bit difficult to answer, certainly for your own organization. So really 5 elements make up that Cyber Essential scheme. One is effective firewalling. Another is secure configurations. A third would be user access control. The fourth element is effective malware protection. And then finally, security update management. That really kind of rounds out the Cyber Essentials scheme. As you mentioned, we do provide white papers that can help Cato Network's customers understand the ways that they can utilize the solution to address each of those areas. What to me is the most exciting about it is that because we are a cloud-based solution, we're able to again address all of those with a unified solution that also brings that scalability that can help with not only the compliance, but to do that on a very broad basis and be able to identify where there may be potential issues that we can help to mitigate. So as you said, I think we have an excellent white paper that kind of takes a question and answer format that can really help identify the ways that you can utilize the Cato Network solution to address each of those 5 areas.
Great to know. Great to know. We're here to help not just protect and secure your network, but to ensure you meet other frameworks. That's good to know.
Right.
So let's get more malicious. Let's start talking about PyPI. Let's get bug fighting. Let's get wasps and pythons attacking each other.
Right.
What is this?
Yes. So for those who aren't familiar, number one, Python is very broadly used, interpreted programming language, if you will. I use the word language loosely, but PyPI is actually it's the Python package index. So one of the great aspects about Python is the ability to import packages of pre-built code that can be utilized in a developer's work. The difficulty is that sometimes we don't do the diligence on those packages that we may happen to import. And what was identified was that I believe the number was 29. There were 29 packages that were identified in the Python package index that were actually contained malicious import statements that would bring in, it would download the wasp stealer, a nasty little piece of malware, and it would be done unbeknownst to the developers who happen to import one of those, again, I think 29 packages.
So what happened once the wasp stealer was on the code or on the machine?
Yeah, so Wasp Stealer is a well-known piece of malware. What it does is it's essentially a scraper, Robin. It tries to locate files, or sometimes cookies or passwords, and attempts to exfiltrate those to the malicious actor. So again, unknown to the developer, they may create this code, and then wherever that code is running, suddenly they would find that data is being taken out of the organization.
Okay, so is this using a standard kind of command and control approach, or is it using something more exotic?
I wouldn't call it anything exotic at all. It really is utilizing a standard exfiltration URL, for example. It's basically a Trojan in terms of malware classification. So nothing super fancy or super exotic, but the hidden nature of it, the nefarious way that it gets pulled down onto the system by unsuspecting developers, that's what makes it quite fascinating in terms of the approach. You almost might call it maybe even a supply chain type issue.
And this is just yet another reason you shouldn't copy and paste code from Stack Overflow unless you know everything it does.
That's right. That's right. Yep. Check before you do it.
Check. Yeah. It feels like 40% of a developer's time is Googling the problem. The rest of the time is copy and pasting and then trying to do exception handling. And I'm not saying that from personal experience at all.
Right. Yeah, Robin, in the development world, we always talk about this concept of shift left, right? In the CI/CD framework and agile development, we always try to shift security left, which that's an endeavor in itself. And it does involve being much more savvy about the ways that we do development. The good news is, though, if it slips through the cracks and it happens to be there, if you have a robust next generation anti-malware solution, you are going to catch it. Now, at that point, you're obviously going to have to mitigate or compensate. It's gotten in there, but at least we're able to catch it. We're able to eliminate it before it can execute on any of its malicious payload.
Okay, that makes sense. Supply chain attacks are dangerous. There's multiple steps to get there. So it's a lot harder than just identifying the transaction at a...
That's right.
Well, identifying a north-south type transaction. So
exactly.
Imagine I'm an existing customer, or I'm somebody who's found this wonderful piece of code. I've accidentally imported the libraries. What happens next? I'm protected behind Cato.
Your next generation anti-malware has just simply got to catch it, and it will. Again, this is well known. So from a signature perspective, caught very quickly. We've said it before on prior episodes, though, Robin, the creativity of threat actors is endless. So it's very important that it be a next generation anti-malware. I know that term gets overused a lot. Let's make sure we describe it. It is taking a machine learning approach based upon heuristics that identifies behavior that tells us something just isn't right here. We're able to stop it and obviously make changes to the code to ensure that that's eliminated from the environment.
That sounds fantastic. And in the event we start identifying this type of malicious traffic, what happens? How do we identify the host? How do we take actions to mitigate the overall problem? We know there's a block. What next?
So it's not just blocking it, right? It's actually doing that elimination, and there's several strategies within development to be able to do that. Where this does become a little bit more complex is when you do begin to talk about that east-west traffic. But once more, it's a question of data in motion as well as data at rest. Ensuring that your device posture is being checked, that monitoring is taking place, and that we can ensure that even if this does happen inadvertently, we know exactly where it's taking place. We can segment that off necessarily while we perform the cleaning or the mitigation, as it were, and restore things to a period of operating as we would expect.
Wonderful. And if this exploit gets more smart and the creativity of the threat actor gets even better, we also have data loss prevention here at Cato as well, just to ensure that your plain text data isn't exfiltrated the wrong way. If you wanted to start,
and that's the key, Robin. It really depends upon sophistication. You're absolutely right. Very effective data loss prevention tools, including data loss prevention that not only is based upon known standards and signatures, but data loss prevention that can be customized. For example, a lot of times when we talk about data loss prevention, we talk about being able to create our own regular expressions, for example, to identify potentially lost information. We certainly have that capability to do that. And naturally, inspecting encrypted traffic, that's also going to be an important part of this discussion.
Absolutely. Security, it's a cake. You don't just have one thing. It has to have a blend of different ingredients all together to really give you that full satisfaction and protection. Or maybe I'm just...
converged blend, yes, 100%.
Yes, I've given up sugar and now I'm just craving cake all the time. Oh, but hey.
I've noticed you using that a lot, Robin.
Yeah, kind of feeling it, innit? So when we come about to talk about health and well-being, we can't forget the Red Cross. So
of course.
Tell us about the Digital Red Cross. Tell us how humanity can be trusted, or how we should trust in humanity.
You know, I don't know if we've stressed humanity enough in this, Robin, so maybe this makes a lot of sense to talk about. But a fascinating proposal by the International Committee of the Red Cross is they're proposing to put what is essentially a digital marker on any of those systems that may be utilized for medical purposes or even for humanitarian purposes. And we can kind of think of this in physical world terms, right? When the unfortunate act of war happens, we know that in that field of battle, a lot of times you will see it could be medical equipment that's marked with the Red Cross. And the understanding based upon the Geneva Conventions is that those are items that they really shouldn't be attacked, because they're being done for humanitarian or medical purposes, to rescue perhaps that man who's had a little bit too much cake, if you will. But again, this really appeals to the human aspect of the would-be threat actor or the hacker, right? The proposal is that if they see this, they will understand that that's something that maybe you shouldn't attack. It's something that is doing humanitarian work, and it really does rely upon the humanity in the equation here. Certainly very interesting proposal that they're putting out there.
I firmly believe there should be honor amongst thieves, but other people not so much. So presuming somebody breaches this suggestion, what are the implications? What are the consequences? Or is it still far too early to say?
Again, this is really being governed by human morality, and we can't make assumptions on that. Just from an opinionation, I think it's an interesting idea, and certainly I almost see it as akin, and I hate to oversimplify this, but it is akin to putting the sign out in front of your house that says that you have an alarm system installed. The hope is that it deters that 80% that would say, you know, we're just not gonna fight with that. Same kind of thing from a humanitarian standpoint, but we do have to understand that really is not a full-on protection or mitigation strategy. There's an old saying that says trust but verify, and I think in this case you really do still need to look at things from a zero trust perspective. We talked about that last episode, Robin. I love what you said in that last episode, that zero trust for you is not something that's simply technological, but it's an approach, a philosophy that you carry through your life. It may seem unfortunate that we need to do that, but again, trust but verify, very important. A good zero trust framework, I think, is always going to be key to back up that warning sign that may be sitting out in front of the assets. Absolutely.
It's a lifestyle. Heck, I even extend the zero trust to just sharing on LinkedIn, for example, just personal privacy. I see people saying, hey, I'm here with this customer, here with that customer. And in my head, I'm just thinking, oh, so you're telling me your house is unguarded, hey? Let's use a little bit of open source intelligence. Let's find out where you live. Right. Here we go. So all of that, trust and verify. But sadly, I don't have enough faith in humanity to believe that people will be so secure. So
motivation,
there's always motivation. And when it comes to healthcare providers, these are the people who are very likely to have large data breaches with costly financial implications. So if this comes out and people, or the majority of threat actors decide, no, we're going to leave these Red Cross, we're going to leave these healthcare providers alone, what effectively this would do is turn those healthcare providers into a false sense of security. So they might start dropping their overall shields and thinking, oh no, we don't have to invest in this, we're safe. Until somebody enterprising comes along and causes a lot of damage. So good idea.
Robin,
it's scary.
I love the tack that you're taking here, because if we were to put ourselves in the seats of a threat actor, it would be very easy to begin to scrape for anything that is displaying that digital badge, knowing that you might have a high value target. Similar to the example that I gave earlier, if I'm listing that I have my alarm system installed by putting the brand sign out in front of the house, in effect, I'm giving the threat actor the ability to go back and research and identify what the vulnerabilities are before they've even tried. They're able to do that offline. So it's a really great point that you're making here. I do think it is worth consideration, but we do need to think about all angles of this, and it'll be fascinating to see where this goes.
Indeed. If it does take off, it'll be a good precedence for the future. Once again, we have to rely on people, and people are awful, terrible things. The computers do what you tell them to do. Organic is messy. So, talking about messy, let's talk about the hell required from patching. So, OpenSSH, the bane of anybody doing key management, that terrible CLI tool. What's been happening in the world of OpenSSL?
Oh my goodness! So we sounded the alarms on a couple of vulnerabilities that were found within OpenSSL, and rightfully so, Robin. OpenSSL is it's prolific, to say the least. Utilized so much even for very basic things such as transport layer security, or TLS. That's that piece, for those that aren't familiar, that is really responsible for securing things like, internet transactions. Very, very broad. Also used within applications. This is a cryptographic solution that is it's so broadly used. And in this particular case, there were originally it was a vulnerability that was discovered. Eventually, it was split into two CVEs. And for those who don't know what a CVE is, it's CVE stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. You can actually find a list of those on cve.org. But these vulnerabilities, as it came out, were discovered in OpenSSL, particularly in version 3 and later. So it was version 3, the baseline, all the way up to version 3.0.6. And of course, because of its broad use, they really sounded the alarm bells, because in this particular case, this had to do with the X.509 certificates. Again, for the layman, that's the certificates that are typically exchanged for encryption during, for example, web transactions. So we could use a very specifically crafted email address and then cause what's known as a buffer overflow. So it would cause basically access to areas of the memory buffer that would potentially allow you to either crash the application or the server, or even maybe potentially execute remote code on that.
So this, to me, has big red flags, alarms, people screaming, and it feels like a Log4j type incident again. Something very important, something used in a myriad of applications, and something that can cause a big lot of pain if you don't upgrade the latest version. So how can you identify what servers, what applications are using vulnerable OpenSSL code?
Well, your insight is spot on as always, Robin. So you used Log4j as the example. Really, this has been characterized as the largest vulnerability in OpenSSL since the 2014 Heartbleed incident. So any variety of tools are able to scan and see if you have those present within your within your applications, for example. Also, if you happen to be utilizing it for that secure encryption that takes place over the web. And from a mitigation standpoint, Robin, not a long time ago, I think it might have been 5 or 6 days ago, OpenSSL released version 3.0.7, and you are able to utilize that, and that will mitigate the vulnerability that exists.
It's a lot of work, though.
It certainly is.
If I'm working in banking, if I'm working in finance, if I have commerce, if I have application-to-application communications, upgrading an OpenSSL version is big risk, because 5 minutes of downtime might lead to $5 to $10 million of lost revenue. Business continuity is key. So what should Cato customers do?
So this really comes along the lines of some things that we've discussed in prior episodes when we talk about, for example, organizations that are still using Windows XP for applications that are critical to their business, and the fact that those vulnerabilities aren't even being patched anymore, right? It's considered end of life. A true converged SASE solution, such as what we offer at Cato Networks, can help to mitigate that, because what we essentially do is establish a secure software-defined perimeter. So although you may have application-to-application traffic that may have this level of code that has these vulnerabilities, that protection that we define as a software-defined perimeter, whether it is a full SASE solution or you're simply looking at our converged SSE stack, it still provides that protection and gives you that time to be able to mitigate this, because you're right, this could take a while to address, and we may not even find everything despite the tools that might be available to identify where that exists.
Okay, so we're blocking at the edge of the WAN, the middle mile across the Cato backbone. So the vulnerability is still there in the packages, but we're preventing people from getting to the vulnerability.
That's exactly right. And even with east-west traffic, Robin, I mean, that's so important. We cannot forget that it's very important to monitor that traffic and block that as well if we see those vulnerabilities. So that, you know, the $64,000 question, as the proverbial saying goes, is, are Cato Networks customers protected? That question was being asked very loudly when these vulnerabilities came to light. The answer is and will continue to be a resounding yes. At no point were our customers exposed. That continues to be so. Nevertheless, our threat researchers they're constantly monitoring, and that's the advantage of a service such as this, where you've got intel that's constantly working in the background for you.
Okay, so it seems like we're protecting our customers from at the edge. We're preventing any of the malicious hackers getting into the network, but people should still be patching. They should still be identifying which compromised hosts have been identified through the Cato platform, through our events management, which will allow you to then not just scrabble around in the dark looking for the right things, but actually being able to identify which servers or applications are vulnerable and which ones are being actively externally exploited. Just like we did with Log4j. We can use the events, we can identify the CVE, and quite easily and quite quickly provide a report of what you need to action and do. So
that's right.
The world of OpenSSL is scary, but luckily Cato helps you sleep a bit better at night.
We're good to go. We're
good to go. Well, in that case, thank you for your time today, Bill. It was very exciting, very good. And until next time, I hope you have a great day.
Robin, be well. Good talking with you.